Hi guys, welcome to the latest podcast of Yarn and Black. Today I've got my great mate on Darcy, and I'll introduce you to Darcy in a second. But first I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm calling in from. I'm here in Baldwin Kew on the land of the Wurundjeri people. I want to pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to acknowledge that our land has never been ceded either. But I'm going to throw straight over to Darcy. Darcy's been our guest on before, so welcome back, Darcy.
Thanks, my brother. So yeah, Darcy McGauley-Bartlett, proud Gunai Kurnai man. I'm coming to you from the beautiful Jara country up here in Bendigo, and I'd like to also pay respects to elders past, present, and also our young and emerging leaders and elders in community, not only here but across the state of Victoria. Since being on the podcast, I think I've won the 2023 Victorian Young Australian of the Year, and I've held a number of different titles. I've had another kid, all that lovely stuff. So it's glad to be back, AJ. Thank you.
That's great. Tell us a little bit about winning. And because you won the Youth Victorian of the Year.
Yep.
How was that year that you were the Youth of the Year?
Interesting, Bruds. I didn't realise how much of a big deal it was. I really didn't. And it was my own ignorance. Like I went to this flash thing at Government House and thought, well, I don't think I really belong here kind of thing. But, being the Vic Young Australian of the Year, I was up against humanitarians, foster carers, Australians making a really significant and huge difference across the state, but also nationally. So I thought, I'm just this young fellow who's advocated for Aboriginal health. Like, I didn't think it was anything different or special, bros. But yeah, I won and then got to go to Canberra, got to meet Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, the other award recipients and nominees, and Uncle Tom Kalmar, Uncle Professor Tom Kalmar, and just so Jade Vagoda from Northern Territory, like the cohort we were in were just amazing young people, but also our senior Australians of the Year, our Australians of the Year, and our local heroes. It was just amazing opportunities. Just one, travel Canberra and go and meet the Minister for Youth Affairs for the federal level, and have some really important conversations at that national level. And even I was on podcasts, I was on the radio, I'd done some TV, I went on Q&A, which I would do it again, but if I had my time over again, I probably wouldn't have been as polished as I was. Makes for good TV, but it's also the fact that you sort of reserve your commentary to, I suppose, be a little bit more tailored, and I'm just not that. Like, I would have loved to have sworn about a couple of things and told people how I really felt. But in that time we had obviously the referendum, and I lent my voice to the yes vote, and it was disappointed in the outcome, and now seeing the effects later on down the track, like the small, like what is it called, post-referendum effects that we're seeing now. But yeah, look, it was an interesting year. So I had my son, so I went to Canberra in January. I had my son in March that year, and then we went through and I'd changed jobs. I'd left the Department of Justice. I went to the Department of Health, and still very hard on my mission of custodial health and Aboriginal hands, and Aboriginal health and justice to be in Aboriginal hands with a self-determined approach and measures determined by community. And it was just a huge year of just learning about, one, is this the life that I actually want to live? Do I want to be a politician? Do I want to be in the public light? Do I want to be on television? And it's funny, bruz, since then, so let's go talk 2024, post that. 2024, you were a nominee for the Australian of the Year. I got to see you at that deadly event that we had down at the Art Gallery in Melbourne. But then post that, it's been a really tough year this year. So 2023, great year, kids, life, loving it. I've had some personal issues come up this year that have sort of changed my way of thinking about life. I think that, and it's really important, still being a young fellow, I'm only 26, is that I'm a father of three, beautiful children that I need to really focus my time and energy on, because they're my future, they're that future. I've got Hudson 6, Addison 4, and Arlo who's 2. And you look at them and go, they could be Australians of the Year, they could be directors in government, they could be running Aboriginal organisations. I need to invest my time now in them. So I've taken a bit of a back seat, brothers, this year. really focused on myself and who I am as a person and what my values are, but also the kiddos, like the kiddos, and making sure that they're good citizens to be real, but also wanting to give them an opportunity to change lives. So it was a big year, Braz. It's been an even bigger this year, filled with sadness, happiness, a lot. Like it's been a great time for self recovery and self reflection as well.
Yeah. What's one thing you found out about Darcy in that process?
The person that I thought that I wasn't. It's interesting, isn't it, brothers?
Yeah.
So I found things about myself, like I can write, like I can write poetry, I can write TED talks, I can do all that kind of stuff that I never given myself the credit to do. I can draw again. I can play guitar. I can play piano. I love being outside. I love fishing. I love camping. The stuff that I never gave myself the time to do because I was so hell bent on I need to be at work. I need to be at work. I need to be at work. And I'm still like that. Is when I'm at work, and we're getting the outcome we need for community. But I also realise, Bruz, that if I can't be there for myself and I can't be there for my kids, I can't be there for my community. And I burnt myself into the ground, and a lot of things had happened. So it was very much like, well, no, it's time. So who I wanted to be, this public servant, tough as nails, lives by the frank and fearless advice with no regret for consequences. I'm still that person, but I also have a life outside of work now. So stuff that I never ever allowed myself. Like AJ, you've known me for 10 years, probably longer now. All I was about the job and about work.
Yeah.
Not anymore. I want to go fishing. I want to go and immerse myself in culture. I want to be with my babies. I want to go like today. Um, we've all got to work. We've got to do what we've got to do. But I'd love to just have your rod in the water right now, out camping on the day before a public holiday. But yeah, I think, Braz, it was figuring out who I was and that I wasn't the person that I'd made myself to be.
Yeah. So what changes have you made in that learning process that you're willing to share?
Yeah, no, of course, Braz, and I think it's important, especially for your following, like social workers and nurses and community. Um, for me, like I was when some of the stuff happened last year, I was 165 kilos. I was unhappy. I was depressed, and I was so entrenched in work, home, work, home, work, home, nothing in between. Um, that I decided in April, after I did a stint of acting up, that I needed 4 months off. That was to get my routine right. It was to get my kids sorted. It was to get all that kind of stuff. And I'm 110 kilos, so I lost a heap of weight, and that was just by diet change, working out, walking. But to be real, I felt that the biggest change was having that life and wanting a purpose outside of work. So whether that was riding horses, whether that was being out on country, whether that was chopping wood, whether that was sitting there with my babies yarning and talking smack like they always do because that's their children. They'll hype you up and then roast you worse than the marshmallow on a campfire afterwards. It was just that change of lifestyle and allowing yourself to be a little bit selfish, bros. I think that was my take home, was that I need to be a little bit selfish now, because if I don't, the outcome could be catastrophic. And I'm only, as I said, only 26, but I'm glad that I've been able to do this now and not when I'm 40, 50 years old, because sometimes it's too late. But the best thing I've heard and the best bit of advice I was given was that you can restart at 20, you can restart at 30, you can restart at 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. There's always time to restart, and allow yourself to do that, and don't feel guilty. Don't be fear of failure, because failure leads to success.
Yeah. From your learnings, what are you teaching your kids right now?
Well, it's to love themselves, bros. like I spent my whole life hating who I was. Like I look in the mirror and hate who I was. I knew who I was at work, but I still didn't like that person. I knew who I was in my private life. I still didn't like that person. Now it's like, well, I want my kids to love themselves. I want them to know that they're their own biggest supporter. Like without my nan, I wouldn't have made it through my childhood. There's no buts or maybes. Um, and it's the same with my dad and my stepmom. Like they were like my dad and my stepmom. When I needed them at 13, they came in, they supported me, they backed me, they did everything I needed them to do. But without them, I would have been lost, bros. And I still didn't know who I was, and I still didn't find out who I was until now. Like, I can't swear on your podcast, sorry, Russ. But like I now found who I am, and I think for my kids is that giving them the freedom to be who they are within the boundaries of the rules. Like there's still rules. Dad's got rules, and you got to follow Dad's rules in his house. But giving them the ability to learn and muck around and find out kind of thing. Like it's that free expressional play and understanding that all kids learn differently. Like the way my son learns is very different to the way my daughter learns and my youngest son learns. So, they're at that very molding age, like Hudson, my oldest boy, who's 6, he's watching behaviors, he's looking at this kind of stuff. And he said to me the other day, AJ, I was sitting in a meeting. He goes, Dad, you were really nice in that meeting. I said, was I, buddy? I said, am I not usually? He goes, long time ago you weren't. And I said, yeah, I know, bub. And he goes, like, so he's been watching that progression and he can see that change. And even for him being at my house, like, we sit down and we yarn all the time and we stop and we draw, or he wants to show me his drawings and we play cards. And he says all the time that, we never used to do this, Dad. And I used to say, I just don't have the time, but I've got to work late again. And there's always going to be that time for working late. But he needs to come first. And so does Addison and Arlo. So, like it's those changes of Dad's there, Dad's got to work, and Dad's got to work hard, but I still have to make time for them. Yeah, it's been interesting, bros.
Yeah, Hudson's in year 1.
Yep.
Yeah. What Aboriginal stuff is he learning at school, if any?
It's funny you say that, bros, because I emailed the school the other day about his education and how my concerns around where the culture was being implemented. And they've got, like, your acknowledgements to country, they've got some incursions and excursions that occur that are based around Aboriginal culture. Cultural history, though, isn't taught in his school at grade 1 yet, but they do talk about artifacts all the time. And I think it's left up to us as parents the majority of the time to do that education and training and teaching. And I reached out to the school the other day, and I don't by any means think that I'm a expert on cultural history and knowledge. But I said to them, I'm happy to meet with the advisory group and talk about this kind of stuff and talk about how we can best engage, because the schools are really open to learn. And that's what I'm really lucky with my son. His principal, his teacher, and a lot of the leading teachers there are really keen to learn and guide and educate, but they also don't want to overstep either. So they do come and yarn to you. And they've got the Kessos to support them and all that stuff. So I think there's a lot. We've got a long way to go, but I think the fact that we're slowly getting into the education system is definitely into the curriculum. I think it's really good. But I think we're still got a long way to go in that space for us.
Yeah. Are the kids starting to ask you questions around culture?
My daughter, more so. So Addison's, she's in kinder, and they have a huge amount of cultural activities. They've got 2 cultural activities once a week. 2 cultural activities once a week. Yes, on the Wednesday there's 2 on the day. They've got their acknowledgement of country in the morning before they kick off class. They're going out. So she wants to know the stories. Like she wants to know the stories that I was told as a kid. And I've obviously got some books that I'll read through to her as well. But she is just such a beautiful young soul that wants to learn and embrace culture. Like I'll sit there and I'll play the didge and she'll play with her clapsticks, or she'll sit there and she'll talk. No idea what she's talking about half the time because you don't listen. But no, like it's important now that I'm like I sat down with her the other day and we were sitting at the front of my house, just me and her, and she was telling me her little story, and the kids pick it up and they listen and they learn, and then they interpret it their own way. So then they tell it back to you in a really, really different way where you go, oh, I don't know if that's right, bud. But anyways, but yeah, bro, it's like she's asking more questions. Hudson, every now and again, like he's one thing that I've found since him being at school is the lateral violence and racism still well and truly alive. Like his mum's English Scottish, so there's me obviously who's Irish Aboriginal. Is that he's got a white hair, blue eyes, fair skin, and he went to a cultural activity last year, I think it was. His mum was telling me a little while ages ago now. And these two young kids said, "Oh, well, you're not Aboriginal because you're not black enough. You can't go to this." So I found that out, and I went to the school, and sure enough, that these young kids, who I think were in grade 6 at the time, knew who I was because I'd seen them through my old jobs. And they're like, "Oh, is he your son?" I'm like, "But it shouldn't matter whether he's my son or not. You're black, you're black. You engage and you support community and culture regardless of where they are on their journey." And but yeah, I think for me it was hard. Like, how do you explain to a 6-year-old, or at the time a 5-year-old, about racism and colonization and intergenerational trauma? Like, it's such a hard thing to sit down with your young child and go. And I never thought that I'd have to do that, Buzz. Never ever thought that I'd have to do that. And at 5 years old, my son's experienced isolation. He's experienced racism. Like, I just couldn't believe that I had to have these conversations with kids, let alone some parents as well. Yeah, it's an interesting space.
Do you think that the school still understands racism from a Aboriginal perspective?
I think it is interesting, Braz, because I haven't thought too much into this, and I don't think as systems they know how to address it appropriately. So, they're kids. Will know this behaviour is not acceptable. I don't care how old you are. We need to educate and guide. So I think that our teachers, like when I brought this up to the teachers, they were actually, I'll give them credit when credit's due, they were really good, and they attacked the issue and they sat down and they yarned with them. But then I'm also sort of like, is it a non-Aboriginal person's responsibility to sit down with two Aboriginal kids and say, you've just committed lateral violence? I don't think that's it. I don't think that should be their responsibility. I think that's an elder or a community member or a respected person should be coming in to do that, in my personal opinion. But I don't think our systems and the environment allows for that. But yeah, I think, Braz, that it's definitely racism in schools is still alive, but it's just how do we address that?
I know you do a lot of work with cultural safety, and I think I asked you before, but what does cultural safety mean to you? And what makes you feel culturally unsafe when you go into services or orgs?
Yeah, Braz. I think my perspective on cultural safety changes regularly because you hear from elders, you hear from services, you hear from our operational service providers as well. There's cultural safety, there's cultural competence, and there's cultural capability, as you know, in your consultancy, Braz. And I think from my perspective, cultural safety starts with just being respectful. Yeah. Don't be rude. Don't be arrogant. You're providing a unbiased approach to quality clinical care, in my opinion. There are cultural understanding that people need to know, like men's and women's business. But there's also environmental factors around family, like whether it's black, white, or indifferent, like it doesn't matter. Is that there are environmental things like family violence and institutionalized sexual abuse and all those kind of things that people need to be aware of, removing the cultural element. So I think that the understanding of systems and environments from our nursing staff is really important, or even nursing, doctors, health service, social workers, whatever you want to call it. It's providing an unbiased approach to quality clinical care and being respectful. That's where it starts. And your cultural knowledge can build. I had an experience, and I won't say what health service I went to, but it was private service, and I felt really culturally unsafe. And that wasn't just because the environment wasn't there. Like, because there was definitely artwork everywhere, there was flags everywhere, there was an acknowledgement, there was a person behind the counter. And it was when they go, "Do you identify as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander?" And you go, "Yes," and they look at you and they go, "Really? You've just now put me in a culturally unsafe situation where I now have to justify to you as a non-Aboriginal person my heritage." So, like, I think that's I don't agree with that, and I feel like our administrative staff need more support in that space. And I don't think it sounds bad, but like years ago, I would have sat there as a young clinician. I would have been like, it's their ignorance, it's this, it's that. But we talk about environmental factors now, and it's like, well, what training have they been provided? Have they been supported to go undertake this journey? What have they been told previously? Michelle, who now works for me, she was a medical receptionist at the co-op when I started as a trainee practitioner. I'm very lucky to have Michelle in my team. But I remember as a kid, and my first job out of school, she said to me, a non-Aboriginal woman who's a strong ally, goes, when you ask them if they identify as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, and they say yes, you don't question it, you move it on. That is for the health worker or the nurse to determine, because they were Aboriginal nurses and Aboriginal health workers. But the other thing is that she was very clear of, we at this service provide a holistic approach to quality clinical care. We have a no wrong door policy. So when somebody walks into a health service or a therapeutic centre or whatever, it should be a no wrong door. And luckily enough to be working in this space in social and emotional well-being, and obviously I'm not on the podcast as a representative from that space, but I'm very lucky to be sitting in a space where I can influence that, the cultural safety of services, whether that be health services, social work, or what have you. But we'd be lost. I'm not. It's definitely not a one-man show. Hey, like we all contribute to the well-being of community, whether it's educating nurses. I think you were down in Bairnsdale a little while ago, or even last week, teaching nurses and doctors. And it just starts with respect, in my opinion, Bros. Like, just open and honest communication, non-biased approach. We're seeing people when they're the most vulnerable.
And as a trainer, I've noticed I've changed a lot in how I train as well, where I'm now more open to people not knowing, because my job is to actually help them know. And one of my biggest mottos in my training is, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
But you've got to be willing to admit that you don't know in order to know.
Absolutely, bros. One of the things, and I don't know how they'd feel about me talking about it, but I'm going to talk about it anyways. When I was in my old role at Victoria Police a long time ago, which I think was 4 or 5 years ago now, one of the things that they did there around cultural change was getting members, whether they were the executive command or operational members on the van, to go out to culture camp with Auntie Robin, Nelson, Uncle Larry Jackson. Cultural education, and then being out on country and learning our your customs and understanding how to work with community on an operational basis. It helps so much. It helps in my opinion, significantly helped me as an ACLO to build respect and rapport with my members. But it was also the fact that we could start changing organisational culture one bit at a time with our culture. Because let's be real, is we as a community provide probably the most holistic health services across the country. Like, as ACOs generally, they provide a holistic health service, no wrong door policy. They see anyone that comes through the door. If other health services modelled that, we might be on that journey of, being the healthiest state in the country. Which I think we're slowly on the journey, and people are jumping on board. But what ACOs are doing aren't new. It's not new. it works. So,
One of the biggest concepts thrown around since we last spoken is truth telling. What does truth telling mean to you?
funny, bros, because I was talking to some people today about this. You remember back even 10 years ago when we met, truth telling was a dream. Like we wish we could tell the truth. People would want you to pander around, provide political responses. Like unfortunately, I'm not able to provide comment at this time. But now we tell truth. And from my perspective, I live by the saying frank and fearless advice. Because if I don't provide that advice and I'm like, yes, yes, sir, no, sir, three bags full, sir, we're not actually going to get any change. And I think that having community, like I've watched community over the last couple of years with the Rural Justice Commission, provide their truth. And watching, as community all across Victoria and even Australia, watch the Premier, Chief Commissioner, Secretaries all provide like state apologies for wrongdoings. The fact of the matter is that people have put their hearts on the line to tell their truth, and they're supported now. I believe they're supported now. But it was a concept for us. For me, truth telling as an Aboriginal man and as an individual, I feel empowered to be able to tell my truth, to be able to speak honest and openly and without fear. I think it's really important because going back 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, 200 years ago, we weren't able to do this. But I think the really important thing is, bros, and as clinicians, we both know this. If somebody's going to tell you the truth and they're going to provide their truth and to heal, we can't do nothing with them. So I'll be really keen to see what happens long term, but my perspective is I don't want to have somebody put their heart on the line to me and not be able to support, guide, and educate with them.
Do you think the Australian public's ready for truth telling?
When I won my award, AJ, I got asked that question by the ABC, I think it was. Might have been another radio station, I can't remember.
Yeah.
And at the time I said, yes, yeah, absolutely. Like, the Australian public's ready. Since the referendum,
yeah,
I'm probably a bit jaded for us because I don't know. I know here in Victoria we're leading the way when it comes to truth, justice, and treaty, like without a doubt. And everybody involved in that process should be commended because this isn't an easy gig, and they're fighting systems and environments that weren't made for us and are made for our processes and our people. I will say that I think that there are parts of Australia that are ready for truth telling. Yeah. I think there are parts of the Australian community that are ready for it. And then there's others that aren't, bros. And as much as that sounds like a really cryptic message, it's a really hard question to answer because in one mind I sit there and go, yes, absolutely. But the other sits there and I thought, same with the referendum, like we're going to get this through constitutional recognition, Aboriginal health and Aboriginal justice in Aboriginal hands. But I think it comes with lack of understanding, like what happens with truth telling. What happens with, like was the same with the yes voters, all that misinformation, bros, that come out there, led by fear. And people were scared. And, truth telling doesn't mean this is a bad thing. This means we need to be told what happened and we need to make sure it never happens again, in my opinion. But also, the Rural Justice Commission, bros, like the commissioners and contributors, whether from state government, community organisations, and community that give their heart on the line, like this commission will pave the way, I believe.
I totally agree with you on the truth telling story, because I think what people and our listeners sometimes don't actually realize is that Aboriginal stories weren't always told by Aboriginal people until probably about 10 or 15 years ago, because our
Mm,
stories were told from a white perspective. And always remember NAIDOC theme from about 10 years ago now would been listen to our stories.
mm,
They were told from a white perspective. Sociologists, anthropologists, researchers came into our communities. They did all the research, they walked away, and they told a truth, but the truth was often whitified and
mm.
let's take out things that might incriminate or hurt or upset or make people feel fragile.
Yep,
I think truth telling now is also about hearing it from the Black perspective and hearing the reality and not glitterifying it or putting the fairy floss on the top. This is exactly what happened, how it happened. And this is exactly how it affects me and my family right now in 2024.
absolutely. And and how this, if we don't do something about it, will affect my families right until the future, until we're all in home. Like if we can do our truth telling now, we can start that healing journey of like there's communities that started their healing journey a long time ago, but there's some that haven't. And like we need to be able to rectify this to support community that are going to go through more not institutionalized, intergenerational trauma. We've got to start that process of healing. And it's funny, Braz, when it comes to cultural safety, like Murrup training. I don't know if you've done it, Braz.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Murrup, like I've reflected on that in the past year, the training that I undertook around healing and understanding things from a stolen generation perspective. But more from my perspective is it was around my own healing journey, and to be able to go through that and be able to tell truth. And our healing journey as Aboriginal people, but also wider community, isn't linear. We're going to go backwards, we're going to go sideways, we're going to skip some steps, come back and do the others, or we might not do them at all. And I think that, truth telling is a huge step towards your own healing journey as well.
Yeah. And I think it is like it definitely got to do with the intergenerational trauma and the transgenerational trauma. And
Mm.
someone asked me the other day, what do those words mean to me? And the thing I thought about was looking at my family history. We've had people in care either on missions and reserves or in foster care systems for the last 6 generations in my family.
Mm.
That's intergenerational trauma. The transgenerational trauma is how those stories are actually conveyed and
Mm-hmm.
transferred generation to generation. So the intergenerational trauma is the factual stuff. The transgenerational trauma is the stories that are associated with that intergenerational trauma. And that's the only way
Cool,
I could.
Russ.
But if I asked you, what would you see as the difference? What would you say?
I definitely couldn't explain it better than you did, bros. Like I wouldn't be able to give it words to do it justice. I think from my perspective, I've looked at just even from my both sides of my family, my mum's and my dad's, is that I've both sides needed a lot of healing. One side did, one side didn't. And believe it or not, my dad's side, which my pop's line, they did their healing. When my nana died, from what my pop was saying to me the other week, um, was they had to do their healing. They had so much trauma of whether they were in, like one of my great auntie was at Cardinia Girls' Home. The other boys, whether they were in Tirana Boys' Home, which just use justice or wherever else, is that they did a lot of time in there and they had to do their own journey. And some never healed and they've now passed. And then there's people like my pop who I just look at and go, to be his age at 65, I think he is. And if I got his age wrong, he'll get crap. He'll get shits. But I will, at 65 to sit there and look at him. He's retired now. He's traveling Australia, just living his best life. To look at him and go, you're not fully healed, but you're almost there. I'd love to be like that, Russ. I'd
Yeah,
love to. Yeah, I think looking at that, he's that generational difference. And we spoke, I think, last time that I was on the podcast about being that generational change, or like I think last year was it last year or the year before? get up, stand up, show up was one of the NAIDOC themes. Now it's keep the fire burning. But from my perspective, it's you being able to go on your own healing journey and that truth telling you can be that generational change to stop intergenerational trauma. Like it's always going to be there. It's not going anywhere, and grief waits for no one, brother. But to be able to work through it and have no shame, like if there's anything I can say to your listeners, bros, is that there's don't be ashamed about getting help. Like, how many times have I reached out to you this year alone just to say, bros, I'm not doing too well. We'll talk for 5 minutes and I'm good and I'll move on. Like I think that's the thing is don't be ashamed to reach out to people because people don't know what they don't know, but they can't help and they can't heal. Therefore, we create that new cycle of trauma and create a new cycle of intergenerational trauma from another traumatic event, whether that's from our history and the colonial history of Australia, right through to our own traumas that we experience in our own lives. We don't uproarize our babies up, but they don't need that. Got to give them the best opportunity of life, eh?
I'm just watching the time because I know that you have to go, but I also know that we have to wind up the podcast a little bit. Otherwise, we'll turn into a mini series rather than a full podcast.
Oh, Buzz, you know us. We'll just create. We've got the other podcasts on YouTube and all that. We'll speak for hours and hours and hours. Get us in a room, Jesus.
That's all right. You can always come back for a third.
Yeah.
I actually want to say thank you for hanging with me. You know how much I love you, and I'm always there for you. But I want to thank you for all the work that you do, and congratulations on the award, even though it's like last year's one. But we know that you're always welcome on my podcast anytime.
Thank you, my brother.
I want to say thanks to Darcy, and I'll see you guys at the next podcast.
Take it easy, everyone.